Got Jim Hammond on the line talking Pitt football. You can join him on Panther Lair. It's the Rivals site for Pitt football and basketball. And we're running down the recruiting class for 2019-2020, coaching staff changes. And, of course, there's the schedule that I got to tell you, Jim, and we may have talked about it during the offseason, and I certainly ranked this 2018 schedule as one of the very toughest in college football and the non-conference as the toughest in college football. Notre Dame, Penn State, Central Florida. Nobody plays anything close to that. And in looking at 2019, we've got something similar. This time, the trip to Happy Valley, and then also the game against Central Florida at home. The other two non-conference games are Ohio and Delaware. So anytime I look at a Power 5 schedule, I'm looking at two things. Who do you play out of conference? Because that range goes from the extremely difficult, brutal, as Pitt did here in 2018 and also 19, to a lot of teams that programs that dodge difficult Power 5 schedules. And then on the other hand, who do they play in the other divisions? So Pitt, of course, was able to gain the reps, take a couple beatings in the non-conference last year, but it still added up to a 6-2 conference record and a division championship. So your thoughts about this upcoming fall schedule?
I think it's a little bit more forgiving. Obviously, like you mentioned, Penn State sticks around, Central Florida sticks around, but you trade out Notre Dame for Ohio, a home game. So it becomes a little more manageable. I think Central Florida, they'll be good, but they won't be quite as good. And not having to go to Orlando is a big help for Pitt. Obviously, going to Penn State is going to be very tough. It's one of the toughest places to play in the country. Penn State has won the past two against Pitt. And obviously last year it wasn't even that close after halftime, and Penn State really just opened it up on Pitt. So it's a difficult game. And I think the one interesting thing here with Pitt is under Pat Narduzzi, he's always started the season with an FCS game, kind of a Youngstown State, Delaware, Villanova, Albany, something like that. And this year Pitt's opening the season with ACC Coastal game. It's kind of coming in conjunction with the ACC network coming out. So I think the ACC network wanted to have some big, compelling games to kind of open the new channel. So Pitt's hosting Virginia at home August 31st. It'll be on the ACC network. It's a big game, and as a defending Coastal champion, that was one of the pivotal games that kind of led to Pitt winning the ACC Coastal. It was a Friday night game down at Virginia. It was a close game. It was a really wet, muddy game. It seemed like almost all of Pitt's games last year were in the rain for some reason, but it's a big game. So it's just kind of a different way to start the season than Pitt is used to.
I'm glad you brought that up. I had the same thought looking at the schedule and saying, okay, last year we unexpectedly had a Pitt-Virginia game that in some respects decided the division championship. Now, Pitt went on after the win to close it out. Virginia would have had to do some more work and obviously lost to Virginia Tech, so that would have lost it in theory. But at the same time, there was only 2 or 3 weeks left in the season, and the winner of that game took control of their destiny within the division. And we turn around this season, and we can see it coming as a possible big game, unlike last year. And it's bam, right there in week 1, Virginia and Pitt there at Heinz Field. Also, the other thing, as I mentioned off the top, is the peek into the other division and who you have to play. Syracuse has become a power. It's going to be a bit of a mystery to me to see how they respond from going from a 4-8 type program to bam, 10-3 bowl win, second seed in the ACC. Are they that program now? Most likely they're somewhere in between and probably a 7 or 8 win team possibly this year. So that's one game outside the division that you always have to play. And then the rotation comes up on a decent Boston College team.
Yeah, it's kind of different this year as well because I mentioned Virginia opening the year, a conference game, and Pitt's Thanksgiving that weekend. It's usually been Syracuse or Miami, some old Big East rivalries. And this year it's Boston College, and Boston College is coming to Pitt. And the two teams are very similar in, how they play the game. Obviously they have a big running game too. So it's kind of, it's not the Clemson game from a couple years ago. Pitt had to travel to Wake Forest this past year. It's a different game, but it's kind of weird that, for teams that don't play too often, that Pitt and Boston College kind of get that that marquee weekend, the biggest weekend of college football, when everyone plays their rivals, and it's an interesting matchup that Pitt and BC kind of got slated to do that.
Jim, as we came down the home stretch in 2018, Northwestern and Pitt were the two teams that I was eyeing as teams that had less than impressive records, but they put themselves in position based on getting key wins in the division. Pitt basically sweeping the division when it mattered, lost to Miami late when it didn't matter, and they had wrapped up the division championship. But then Northwestern kind of separated itself, won some big games, and had a little bit better record. Pitt continued to flounder outside the division, but again, a division championship on one hand, winning 6 of 8 in the ACC, getting outclassed as just about everybody else was, so no shame in losing to Clemson. Losing a bowl game in which that could have gone either way, obviously at 14-13. So it's 7-7 on one hand and getting blasted outside the conference, but winning a division championship. How did the Panther faithful take 2018?
Yeah, it was kind of a weird way because, at the end of the day, 7-7 is just, it doesn't happen often. So there's not a lot of precedent there, and people didn't really know how to act. I think as the run was happening, as Pitt kind of kept moving forward and forward to, winning the Coastal, everyone was really excited. There was a real buzz around the program. Then obviously losing to Clemson the way it did, it's humbling. But, you look at Clemson, they killed Alabama. They killed everyone. I mean, they're a very good football team. So I don't think there's a ton of shame in Pitt for losing that game. But it's the week before, whenever Pitt really laid an egg against Miami, and obviously the bowl game was kind of lackluster, but Quadriolison got hurt in the first quarter, and that really it kind of took the wind out of the sails there. But after 4 years of Pat Narduzzi, I'm looking at his record. He's 28-24 overall, averaging 7 wins a season. He hasn't won a bowl game yet, but I look at his ACC Coastal, or just his ACC record overall, and it's kind of comes back to something we talked about earlier, is Pitt really schedules tough in the non-conference because he's 20-12 in the ACC, which is pretty good. And he has a lot of success. He was 6-2 his first year, 6-2 this past year. And in 2016, they were 5-3 with a win over Clemson. So he does fare well against ACC teams. It's, it's these challenging, playing Oklahoma State, Penn State, Central Florida, Notre Dame. It really just, I think it kind of wears on Pitt. And, just kind of using a parallel, I look at Syracuse. They just had a really great year, but they didn't have to play Penn State. They didn't have to play Central Florida, and they kind of gave themselves a couple more wins. So it's kind of an ongoing debate among Pitt fans. It's like, should they stop scheduling the way they do? Because Narduzzi actually does well against his conference opponents.
I am going to go out on a limb. I have to obviously back this up, but at 20-12, so that's 32 games. That's obviously 4 seasons times 8 games. I'm going to guess that they have the best division record, the best conference record for any team in the division over that time frame. I got to think that 20-12 is, I got to think when I see Virginia Tech, but they faltered various years. Miami was only 4-4 this past year. They were only 4-4 the year before last, meaning 2016. I got to think 20-12 is probably the best record in the division. Jim, the other thing I did was, as soon as Pitt wrapped up the division, and Northwestern to a lesser extent, I did some research over the last 25 years to see what teams have had these kind of records to win division championships. And there was a situation with Georgia Tech. There was a situation with UCLA that they actually had to have the NCAA or the powers that be give them a bowl exemption to participate in the conference championship game because they wanted to be eligible for a bowl with a certain record. At that time, they had to be 6-6, and they were under 500, made it to their respective conference championship games, and needed an exemption, and ended up with crazy 6-8, 7-7 kind of records, as you mentioned. Pitt had this past season, and there's quite a few down through history, but those are the two that stuck in my mind.
Yeah, it was just a weird scenario. So, like I said, I at the time, I think people were really excited about winning the Coastal, and beating Virginia and Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech and Syracuse. I mean, a lot of those games came down to the wire, came down to the last second. So, if nothing else, Pitt football proved to be exciting for some Pitt fans because a lot of those games were were close. And, it took a last minute interception against Syracuse to win the game. And it took a defensive stand against Virginia to win the game. So it was things like that. I mean, those were encouraging signs, but, losing 3 straight to end the year really just, I think it stuck with people, and, it just leaves the sour taste in your mouth. And obviously you followed up with, the 50th ranked recruiting class. So it felt like in October, Pitt had a lot of momentum and a lot of things going their direction, and all of a sudden it didn't.
Jim Hammett's been joining us here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, for a long time. Please check out his work at Rivals. It's Panther Lair for football and basketball coverage for the Pitt Panthers. Please, of course, subscribe, like, comment, do all those good things to help support the channel here at Mark Rogers TV. Jim, we appreciate you stopping by.
All right. Thanks, Mark.